Imagine this. It's the start of a new year, and you're sitting in your room, staring at a blank piece of paper with 2025 goals written at the top. Your mind is racing, and your heart feels heavy. That was me just a couple of years ago. I knew I wanted to achieve something meaningful, but there was one big hurdle in my way. English. I've always admired those who could switch between languages so effortlessly, especially when it came to discussing money and finances. For me, it was a different story. English wasn't just a foreign language. It was a wall standing between me and the life I envisioned. But let me tell you, that frustration lit a fire inside me. I realized that if I wanted to take control of my financial future and build the life I dreamed of, I had to face my fears head on. So I started small, learning phrases here and there, practicing in front of a mirror, and even watching financial podcasts in English with subtitles. Today, I'm here to share that journey with you, not just to inspire you, but to equip you with practical tools. We're going to dive into a story about planning your finances for 2025. Along the way, you'll pick up essential English phrases, build your confidence, and take one step closer to mastering financial English. Here's a quick tip before we jump in. Turn on the subtitles if you need them, and don't hesitate to pause and repeat after me. The more you practice, the more natural it'll feel. Ready to learn, grow, and start your 2025 with purpose. Let's do this together. It was a crisp morning in New York City, the kind where the city's energy buzzes through the streets, and even the air feels alive. I had just walked into a small cafe, tucked away on a quiet corner of Manhattan. The aroma of fresh coffee filled the air, and the low hum of conversations created a comforting backdrop. As I stood in line waiting for my turn, I couldn't help but overhear the two men standing ahead of me. They were casually dressed, yet something about their confident tone and the words they were using caught my attention. Diversifying is key, one of them said, his voice firm but approachable. You need to make sure your portfolio is balanced. Stocks, bonds, maybe even some crypto. If you're feeling adventurous. I froze. These weren't just random coffee shop musings. They were talking about investing, and I could feel my curiosity growing. The only problem, they were speaking in English, using terms I barely understood. Words like portfolio and diversify sounded foreign and intimidating. As I sat down with my coffee, I replayed their conversation in my head. I wanted to understand. No, I needed to understand. Investing was something I always wanted to explore, but my lack of confidence in English held me back. I imagined myself walking up to them, striking up a conversation, and asking for advice, but every time, the scenario ended with me fumbling over my words or misunderstanding what they said. Instead, I pulled out my notebook and began jotting down everything I could remember from their conversation. Portfolio, diversifying, bonds, I wrote, determined to figure out their meaning later. But deep down, I knew this wasn't enough. If I wanted to grow, I had to do more than just write down words. I had to step out of my comfort zone and take action. Little did I know, that decision, right there in that bustling cafe, was about to change everything. The cafe started to empty as the morning rush subsided, leaving a quieter, more inviting atmosphere. I sat at my corner table, staring at the scribbles in my notebook. Portfolio, diversify, bonds. These words felt heavy with meaning, yet they were just out of reach. My coffee was getting cold, and I knew I couldn't sit there forever, trapped in my thoughts. Then, something shifted. I thought about all the times I'd stayed silent, letting opportunities slip away because I was too afraid of making mistakes. It wasn't just about English anymore. It was about proving to myself that I could grow, learn, and face challenges head on. The two men were still sitting at their table near the window, their conversation now quieter, but no less animated. I took a deep breath, clutching my notebook like a lifeline, and stood up. My heart raced as I walked over, every step feeling heavier than the last. "Excuse me," I began, my voice trembling slightly, their expressions polite but curious. "I heard you talk about investing. I'm learning about it, but I'm new, and my English is not so good. The taller of the two, who had a kind smile, nodded encouragingly. Sure, what's your question? He asked, his tone patient. I hesitated, searching for the right words. What does it mean to diversify? He leaned forward, as if genuinely interested in helping. Diversify means not putting all your money in one place, he explained slowly, emphasizing the key words. Imagine you have $1,000. Instead of spending it all on one stock, you divide it into different investments. That way, if one doesn't do well, the others might balance it out, repeating the word under my breath. Diversify. Spreading risk. Exactly, he said, his enthusiasm making me feel more at ease. And a portfolio, he continued, is just a fancy way of saying all your investments together. Stocks, bonds, savings, everything. As the conversation continued, my confidence grew. I asked about bonds, mutual funds, and even their thoughts on crypto. They answered patiently, simplifying complex ideas without making me feel small. By the time I returned to my seat, my notebook was filled with notes and my mind buzzing with new knowledge. But more than that, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Pride. I'd taken a leap and it had paid off. That day, I realized two important things. First, most people are more willing to help than we think. And second, every mistake or awkward moment is a step closer to fluency and to understanding the language of success. Walking out of the cafe that day, I felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. The city around me seemed different, more vibrant, more full of opportunities, but I knew that my journey had just begun. It wasn't enough to understand a few words or concepts. I needed to create a plan, one that would turn all this new knowledge into action. The subway ride home was the perfect time to think. As the train rumbled beneath the city, I pulled out my notebook and started sketching ideas. Diversify, portfolio, and risk were now more than words. They were tools I could use to shape my future. When I got home, I spread my notes across the dining table. I opened my laptop and searched for beginner guides on financial planning. A dozen tabs later, I found myself overwhelmed by advice, jargon, and strategies. It was tempting to give up, but I reminded myself of the conversation at the cafe. Every small step mattered. I decided to start simple. I divided a blank page into 3 sections: goals, budget, and investments. Under goals, I wrote 1. Save $5,000 by the end of the year. 2. Invest in at least one stock or mutual fund. 3. Improve my financial vocabulary and confidence in English. Next came budget. This was trickier because it meant facing some uncomfortable truths about my spending habits. I listed my monthly income, then broke it down into essentials like rent, groceries, and transportation. Finally, I added a category for investments, even if it was just $50 a month to start. The last section, investments, felt the most daunting. I remembered the men at the cafe talking about beginner-friendly options like index funds. I jotted down, research index funds, along with terms like low risk and long-term growth. Creating this plan felt empowering, but I knew it wasn't enough to just write things down. I needed accountability. That's when I thought of joining an online community. I searched for forums and social media groups focused on beginner investing. To my surprise, many of these groups were international, and members often shared tips in English. One post caught my eye: How to build your first investment portfolio in 2025. The author used clear, simple language and even included links to free resources. I bookmarked it, determined to read every word later. As the days turned into weeks, my financial plan began to take shape. I opened a savings account with automatic deposits, researched index funds, and even made my first small investment. More importantly, I committed to practicing English daily, listening to podcasts, reading articles, and engaging in online discussions. One evening, while revisiting the cafe notes, I had an epiphany. Financial planning and language learning weren't so different. Both required patience, consistency, and a willingness to embrace mistakes. I realized that every budget adjustment, every financial term I learned, and every awkward English sentence I spoke was a step towards something bigger. Planning wasn't just about money or language. It was about building a foundation for the life I wanted. A few weeks after my cafe encounter, I found myself back in that same cozy spot, notebook in hand, sipping a latte. This time, I was prepared. I had spent hours practicing English phrases and researching investment terminology. I even had a list of questions I hoped to ask if the opportunity arose. As if on cue, a woman at the next table pulled out her laptop and began a Zoom call. She spoke clearly and confidently, discussing terms like return on investment and financial independence. Her tone was professional but approachable, and I couldn't resist listening in. When her call ended, I hesitated for a moment before gathering the courage to speak. "Excuse me," I said, leaning slightly toward her table. "I heard you talk about financial independence. I'm learning about it, but it's new for me. Do you have any advice?" She smiled warmly, closing her laptop. "Of course. Financial independence is all about creating a lifestyle where your investments or savings generate enough income to cover your expenses. It's not an overnight thing, though. It takes time and planning." I nodded, scribbling her words into my notebook. "Building a portfolio?" I asked, testing one of the terms I'd learned. "Exactly," she replied. "But it's more than just investing. It's about making smart financial decisions every day, saving consistently, avoiding unnecessary debt, and understanding your spending habits." Her words resonated with me, and I found myself asking more questions. "What's the first step?" "I mean, for someone who's just starting, start by tracking your expenses," she said. "Write down everything you spend for a month. It might surprise you how much goes toward things you don't need. Once you know where your money is going, you can redirect it toward your goals." I felt a rush of inspiration. "I've been doing that," I said, pulling out my budget plan to show her. She looked it over, nodding approvingly. "This is a great start," she said. "But remember, it's not just about the numbers. It's about the mindset. Think of every dollar as a step toward your independence." Our conversation flowed effortlessly, and I noticed something remarkable. I was no longer worried about making mistakes or sounding awkward. I was genuinely engaged, absorbing her insights and sharing my own thoughts. By the time she packed up to leave, I felt a surge of gratitude. "Thank you for sharing," I said. "I learned a lot today." "You're welcome," she replied. "Keep asking questions and stay curious. That's how you grow." Walking home that evening, I reflected on how much I had gained from these real-life conversations. They weren't just teaching me about finance. They were helping me build confidence in my English, one interaction at a time. The following weekend, I sat at my desk, staring at my laptop screen. On one side was my budget and financial plan, now looking more organized than ever. On the other side, a stock market research website displayed graphs and lists of companies with intimidatingly complex data. This was it, the moment to take the leap and make my first real investment. My heart pounded as I reviewed everything I had learned over the past few weeks. Start simple, I reminded myself. The woman at the cafe's advice echoed in my mind. Think of every dollar as a step toward your independence. I decided to begin with an index fund, a low-risk option I had researched extensively. It wasn't flashy, but it was stable, a perfect starting point for someone like me. The website's interface guided me through the process step by step, and soon enough, I had clicked the final confirm button. The screen flashed a message. "Congratulations! You've made your first investment." I sat back, exhaling deeply. It was a small step, just a few $100s, but it felt monumental. For the first time, I wasn't just learning about finance. I was living it. Over the next few weeks, I started making more real-life financial decisions. I switched to a no-fee checking account, negotiated lower rates on my utilities, and even found a side gig, teaching conversational English online. Each choice, no matter how small, felt like another brick in the foundation of my financial independence. One particularly rewarding moment came when I visited the grocery store. Armed with my budget, I carefully compared prices, sought out discounts, and avoided unnecessary splurges. At the checkout, I realized I had saved almost 20% compared to my usual spending. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the control and awareness I was developing. As my financial habits improved, so did my confidence in English. I found myself more comfortable reading financial articles, participating in online discussions, and even explaining concepts to friends who were curious about my progress. One evening, a friend from my language group asked me, "How do you stay motivated to learn finance and English at the same time?" I smiled, thinking about the journey so far. "It's not easy," I admitted, "but I see them as connected. Understanding finance helps me build my future, and learning English is the key to accessing all the knowledge I need. They work together." My friend nodded, seeming inspired. "That's a great way to look at it. Maybe I'll start learning about finance too." The conversation reminded me of how far I had come and how much further I could go. Applying my knowledge wasn't just about personal growth. It was also about sharing and inspiring others. By the end of the month, I revisited my financial goals. To my surprise, I was ahead of schedule. My savings account had grown steadily, my investments were performing as expected, and I had a clearer vision of my path forward. It was a humbling and empowering realization. Small, consistent actions had created tangible results, and while the journey was far from over, I felt more equipped than ever to face whatever came next. Progress felt steady, almost too steady. Then, as life often does, it threw me a curveball. One afternoon, I logged into my investment account to check on the index fund I had so proudly chosen. The numbers were red, not just red, but glaringly so. My modest gains had turned into a small loss. Panic bubbled up inside me. Had I made a terrible mistake? Was all my hard work and learning for nothing? My instinct was to sell everything, cut my losses, and retreat. But then I remembered something crucial. Setbacks were part of the process. Taking a deep breath, I revisited the resources and advice I had gathered. Market fluctuations are normal, one article reminded me. The key is to stay patient and focus on long-term goals. I decided to hold on to my investment, reminding myself of the bigger picture. The challenges didn't stop there. At work, a miscommunication due to my still developing English skills led to a frustrating misunderstanding with a colleague. I had used "I will" instead of "I would," unintentionally sounding demanding rather than polite. Though minor, the incident shook my confidence. Determined to learn from it, I approached the colleague to clarify. "I'm sorry if I came across as rude earlier." I explained, "I'm still learning English, and I'm working on improving my phrasing." To my relief, they smiled and assured me it was no big deal. "You're doing great," they said. "Honestly, I admire your effort to learn a new language while handling everything else." These words stayed with me, reminding me that setbacks weren't failures. They were opportunities to grow. Another hurdle came in the form of burnout. Juggling financial planning, language learning, and daily life felt overwhelming at times. I realized I had been pushing myself too hard without giving myself space to rest and recharge. To address this, I restructured my schedule. I dedicated specific blocks of time to each goal and included short breaks to reflect, relax, or simply enjoy a hobby. It was a small change, but it made a world of difference. I also leaned on my support network. During a language group meeting, I shared my struggles with balancing everything. To my surprise, others chimed in with their own stories of setbacks and resilience. "Sometimes it's okay to take a step back," one member said. "It doesn't mean you're giving up. It means you're preparing to move forward." Encouraged, I began to view challenges not as roadblocks, but as lessons. I started journaling about my experiences, noting what went wrong, what I learned, and how I could do better next time. Gradually, the red numbers in my investment account began to shrink, replaced by steady growth. My English improved as I practiced more mindful communication, and most importantly, I felt more balanced and resilient. By facing and overcoming these setbacks, I gained something invaluable: the belief that I could handle whatever came my way. It wasn't about avoiding challenges. It was about learning to navigate them with grace and determination. As I sat back one evening, reflecting on everything that had happened, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of pride. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth every challenge, every setback, every lesson. The numbers in my investment account had finally begun to climb steadily. My English had improved, and most importantly, I had learned how to balance the different aspects of my life without overwhelming myself. It wasn't just about financial growth or mastering a new language anymore. It was about the growth that came from within. I had built resilience, patience, and an unwavering belief in my ability to overcome whatever came my way. I opened my journal and began to write, as I often did, reflecting on the milestones I had reached. My investment had gone from red to green, symbolizing more than just monetary success. It represented my ability to stay the course, to trust in the process, even when things seemed uncertain. I thought about how far my language skills had come. The frustrating miscommunications were becoming fewer, and conversations that once felt intimidating now felt more manageable. I was still learning, still making mistakes, but the confidence I had gained made all the difference. But it wasn't just about the wins. It was about the process of getting there. It was about pushing through the tough moments, embracing discomfort, and allowing myself to grow. Not just as someone who could speak English or manage finances, but as a person who knew how to keep moving forward. Despite the obstacles, each challenge had been a stepping stone, and the setbacks had become catalysts for deeper understanding. I knew I wasn't perfect, and there was still much to be done, but as I looked back at my journey, I saw how much I had grown and how far I had come. It wasn't a straight path, but it was mine. I had learned to embrace the ups and downs, understanding that each moment contributed to the bigger picture. I thought about how easy it would have been to give up at any point, to retreat when the investment numbers turned red, to shy away from the tough conversations because of language barriers, to ignore my need for rest and self-care. But I didn't give up. I didn't quit. And that, I realized, was the greatest lesson of all. The key to success, I had learned, wasn't about avoiding failure. It was about showing up again and again, even when the road got tough. It was about having the courage to continue, to adjust when things weren't going as planned, and to trust that, in time, the pieces would fall into place. So, what's next? As I reflected on my progress, I realized that this was just the beginning. The growth I had experienced was valuable, but I knew that life would continue to throw curveballs. The real work, the real test, would be how I would continue to adapt, evolve, and learn. But I was ready. I could face whatever came next, because I knew that setbacks were simply part of the journey, and with each one, I would continue to rise, stronger and more confident than before. So, I leave you with this. No matter where you are in your own journey, remember that progress is not linear. There will be moments of doubt, of struggle, of frustration, but those moments do not define you. They are opportunities to grow, to become the person you are meant to be. So, if you're facing challenges right now, take a deep breath, step back, and trust the process. You've got this. As for me, I'm ready for whatever comes next. And I know you are too. Thank you for following along on my journey. If you found any value in my story, I encourage you to share it with someone who might benefit from it. Let's continue to learn, grow, and face our challenges together.